Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first annual Asara B'Tevet post Nittel Nach Friday. With us, we have Rabbi Yitzchak Adlerstein, who is the editor of a very well-known internet blog called Cross Currents, and is also a director of interfaith affairs, I believe, at the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And with us is also Dayan Pfeffer, who is our recently appointed Rav, to have a discussion about Asara B'Tevet as to how it translates from the past into now. We're going to answer some questions. Of course, Asara B'Tevet starts off as the day it's mainly commemorated for the siege starting on Yerushalayim. And also we lump in together two other things. One is from the 8th of Teves and the 9th of Teves. There were different things that happened. There was the Torah was translated into Greek, which is apparently a bad thing, which we may discuss about as well. On the 9th of Teves, there was something else that happened, which is not so clear, but apparently Ezra may have died. That may be the tragedy itself. We say it in the Slichos, but it's not the Aruch HaShulchan or the Shulchan Aruch is not so clear as to what exactly happened on the 9th, but nonetheless, we do it all together. We lump everything into Asara B'Tevet, so we're not going to talk about the reasons for Asara B'Tevet. We're going to try and talk about the reasons why it's still particularly relevant today and what other messages we can take for ourselves. We're going to be a little bit short on time. Try to have the speakers speak a little bit loud because we don't have a sound system. So the format will be, we'll ask questions, direct them at either one of our panelists, and we'll give the other one a little bit of time to respond. So I think we will start with our first question. I'm going to present it to Rabbi Adlerstein. How would you say that Asara B'Tevet is relevant for our reality today? Just get off the introductory question, right? Mainly because we're in a reality of a sovereign Jewish state, which seems a rather far cry from the situation that it was in our exilic times. Certainly, it's different to commemorate the beginning of the end of the times of the Geula, right? At the times of being in Eretz Yisrael, right? When we're back here. So if you can give us a brief 5-minute opening statement.
Okay, I don't think it's going to take 5 minutes. This is just a warm-up exercise, I assume. Yeah. The same question could be asked about any of our Tanios, and the answer is something that I presume everyone in this august crowd knows fully well. We are now heading to election number what? Four. Someone once said that this generation will be remembered as the first one that exported dumb Jews. We are not in great shape. Anyone who needs signs of Churban need only open their eyes. This is not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted for us. This is not yet the kind of state that we've ever looked for. This is not the presence of the Shekhinah in its full glory that we are far from having achieved. And the reason why we haven't achieved it is because of our own problems, our own inadequacies, our own chatoyim. And we need, if anything, more tanios rather than fewer to make us cognizant of what we still have to achieve and our role in being ma'akev, the Geula.
Just to get back to that question, but nonetheless, somewhat of a shift has occurred relative to the situation that there was in the Gullus. As we may not be in perfect shape, we're definitely in better shape.
We are in better shape, which increases the responsibility for us to recognize V'chaste Hashem, as Rav Soloveitchik called it, kol dodi dofek, that the knock on the door of our beloved has already been heard. So on the one hand, we are all just so immensely privileged to be living in this wonderful country, for the first time in 2,000 years, having something that never could have been imagined. Rav Soloveitchik, by the way, I'm not from YU, I just happen to know Rav Soloveitchik stories. When he was attending University of Berlin, he would travel by train every now and then to Rav Chaim Ozer to speak and learning, which he said was rather deflating, because every time that he had a real chiddush to excitedly share with Rav Chaim Ozer, Rav Chaim Ozer sat there and he said, second bookcase from the left, third down, fourth sefer from the left, pull it out on page 263, you'll see somebody who said it 75 years ago. Anyway, he once came to him to discuss something he was working on. What would the halacha be if there ever would be a Jewish state? And Rav Chaim Ozer smiled at him and he said, there'll be a Jewish state when hair grows on this palm. We don't like talking about when Rav Chaim Ozer was wrong, but in this case, Baruch Hashem, he was wrong, but nobody could have anticipated that. We are so privileged, but that also is a responsibility. If we're getting closer, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, look, I took you half of the way there. It's up to you to do the rest. We are beset with shortcomings, with people who don't recognize the chesed of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done for us, and for innumerable other inadequacies, which maybe we shouldn't mention today because it's a dangerous day.
Pfeffer, would you like to respond? What was your take on the question, if anything different?
Well, I would respond briefly that, we said in the Slichas this morning, a sentence caught my eye. We say, "Upitz'i lo rukacha," meaning our wound, our injury has not been softened. And I think that today, if we want to face up to it and to speak with intellectual honesty, the wound has been softened, meaning it's not as bleeding. It's not as, it says over there, it's a wound which is a retzach wound. It's a fatal wound, and somehow we've bounced back. Certainly, like my distinguished colleague Rabbi Adlerstein mentioned, we're here, and it's remarkable, and this is of course meaningful. And it's true that we have a fourth election. I don't know. I think when Mashiach comes, we'll probably still have politics. Who knows? I don't know if we'll have 4 elections in the space of a couple of years. Let's hope things will. In the name of Shlomo HaMelech B'Shatoi, he still had to make covenants with other nations and so on. Meaning the world will. We don't exactly know how the world will look, but it might well continue to function in an earthly way as we know today, albeit on a more elevated what we know. But certainly what's still missing is the Dvar Hashem, meaning, what we mourn is many of the other elements that we mentioned in the Slichos, which is that the Shechina is still absent. We don't have Dvar Hashem. We're very confused as to what needs to be done. We're confounded because we lack guidance, we lack clarity. And in many senses, I would add, we're going through a long Corona crisis, a long time, and I'm not a Navi, and I don't know exactly what the message to us is, but something that keeps pounding us again and again is this message that we're such a superficial generation, meaning with all the goodness that we have, with all the bounty, and with the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that allows us to live here, nonetheless, we're so steeped in superficiality. We're so, if we can't do things outside, then we bring the superficiality into our homes via all of the different media channels and everything that we're able to do, that we're privileged to have on the one hand, but we make use of it in a way that negates our ability to, in a sense, develop our own pnimius, our own internal motion towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And only in that internal, in that quiet, in that solitude, in that serenity, can we hear the divine voice, can we hear HaKadosh Baruch Hu within us. So, I think Corona is trying to somehow quieten this, not sure how successful we are. And by the way, Asara B'Tevet is the beginning of the Churban. meaning it's the siege, it's the beginning. There was still a chance. It's the time that reminds us we have to listen. There's still time, right? There's a way to go. It was 1.5 years, I think at least, between the siege of Asara B'Tevet and the final Churban. And Klal Yisrael was requested, was demanded from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to listen, to hear the voice, to think about what we're being called to do. And that's a contemporary message for sure. Meaning to try to listen, what's required of us, what's demanded of us, where should we be going? And it's a good thing to commemorate. And fasting, I mean, the Rambam says, what's the point of fasting? To listen, to do tshuva, to hear what does God want from us. And so it's good to do this.
So that rebounds into another question that we actually have. Continuing with the theme, which if I understood Rabbi Adlerstein correctly, it's that the fast is not as much of a mourning at this point. It's more of a call to responsibility, which, as the Dayan just mentioned, in Asara B'Tevet, which is unique, we're really talking about a missed opportunity that the Bnei Yisrael had, in that they were not really given an actual death blow at the beginning. They were given something which was a real warning sign. Nebuchadnezzar could have just picked up his armies and left, and nobody would have really known much of the difference. So in that sense, it really is about personal responsibility or national responsibility. So the Dayan started talking about some of the responsibilities that we may have today, which there are warning signs and we may not be heeding them properly. Give me some examples. Would you think of any examples of things that we should be doing today, some warning signs that we should be heeding? We're not Nevi'im, we don't know what the warning signs are about, but we can certainly be mefashbesh b'ma'aseinu and look at what problems we may have. What would you think is really at the top of our priority list?
And again, is a no-brainer. I read about it every day in the press. Obviously, the things that are responsible for all of our misery are women. If you're Sephardic, it's because they wear shaitels. And if you're Ashkenazic, it's because they wear shoulder-length shaitels, clearly.
My premise of we are not Nevi'im was meant to curtail this.
I'll get to that. And the other one, obviously,
Can I come in on that?
the other one obviously is smartphones. If we could get rid of smartphones and women, then certainly Mashiach would come. That's clear. Look, you don't want. Well, I think that the reason for all of our tzaras is this. Look, there are many inadequacies, and we could spend lots of time talking about some of the failures in a community which is remarkable for all of its milos, which we should not forget about for a second. But there are failures. I recall an incident many years ago when there was some kind of tragedy, I think a group of terrorist attacks, and everybody was being mefashbesh b'ma'aseinu. What is this all about? And it was reported that Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, said in the yeshiva, he says, I don't get it. They're looking for this school or for that school or for saying Yehoshua Rabbah louder, or said last night a homeless person died on the street in Tel Aviv. How could that be in a Jewish state? How could that be? We live in a community in which so many of our co-religionists in the truest sense, those with whom we share halacha and hashkafa and enthusiasm for Torah, withdrew from civic life and refused to have anything to do with Achenu B'nai Yisrael, which never was true in Jewish history, even among those of lesser observance or different hashkafas. But we have from Yereim Ushleimim, people who in the COVID crisis said, yeah, I have this reason for not wearing a mask, this reason for not social distancing, and we'll get herd immunity and all kinds of narishkeit without any consideration of what the impact was going to be on 8.5 million other people in the country, as if they didn't exist. And without consideration about what message they were broadcasting to people in America, which still has a few Jews, who would take the same kind of license and create the greatest Chilul Hashem in memory of a group of frum Jews relative to non-Jews in the country. I shudder to think, and this is part of what I do professionally, of what the backlash is going to be in the next couple of years in the United States, of the anti-Semitism that has been generated by picture after picture after picture of frum Jews thumbing their nose at the authorities. Now, we could go through many others, but I want to tell you one Maisa about Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. That's how I had the privilege of knowing. Once got to drive him all the way from Brooklyn to his house in Monsey. I think it was a principals convention of Torah Masorah. And he was asked about diversity in the frum community and separation of different groups. He threw in this, said, Chazal aren't quite sure about who Eov was or when he lived. You have something like 8 different opinions or more in the Daf Ches and Baba Basra, someplace around there, including one that Eov never existed at all, and just a literary figure to make a point. So what are you supposed to do with that? He said, clearly the message of the Gemara is that all of these were possible, and all 8 Eovs have separate lessons to convey to us. And if we don't know which one was the real Eov, because he ain't standing up, then what we're supposed to take away from this is that all of them are valid, each one of them has a lesson, and we have to learn from every one of them. I think without Nevuah, as you said, we're not going to figure out which one is ticking off HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Bezdin Shalmalo this morning. But if all of them are possibilities, then we're duty bound to consider all of them. I'm not so sure about the length of women's shaitels, but I'd even be willing to consider that, as long as all of the other possibilities are considered as well.
And all of them are possibilities.
They are.
Part of the question is, which ones do we think should be our priority? We only have so many resources to devote. So I'll turn that question to Dayan.
Thank you. Well, I'm not going to speak about women in shaitels. You'll forgive me for leaving that to the broadsides. We can read them when we leave shul.
It's a hairy issue. Moderator has to stick one of those in.
I would say something along the following lines. I mentioned before the element which I think is sorely lacking for many of us, and I speak obviously primarily about myself, of a kind of serenity, something deeper, something more internal, something less superficial. And I think that if we want to speak about a general theme that needs to be prioritized, I would speak about the same idea, but on a public level, on a communal level. And what do I mean by that? One of the calamities that you mentioned before about Asara B'Tevet is really the sources in Adlerstein. It's mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch in Tavkuf Pei, about the things that Tainis Tzadikim, that righteous people fast for 3 days, right? 8th, 9th, and 10th. And the 8th was the translation of the Torah into Greek. And the problem, what's the problem? Translating the Torah, we do it into English. It's nice. Ashkel does it. Well, what can be so bad about translating the Torah into Greek? And there's a lot that can be said about this. But for this purpose, I think that there was something lost over there about the uniquely Jewish, the uniquely Klal Yisrael grasp of the Torah, understanding of the Torah. We have our understanding. We have the way that we live by the Torah. And the wording of Megillas Tainis is that the Torah couldn't be properly rendered into Greek. Our language, Lashon HaKodesh, Hebrew, our language has its wealth, has its richness, has its different modes of interpretation that you just can't translate into other language. I mean, this is a problem generally in translation, but certainly when we're speaking about Lashon HaKodesh, the wording in which the Torah was given versus other languages. And if I look around today, you know, just thinking about the Hasidic music that I have at home, it's a standard Goyish music with Hasidic, you know, words or from people singing it, but it's your standard pop music. There's nothing Jewish about it at all. Where's our Judaism being reflected? Yes, we have a state and it's wonderful, but our state mustn't be a state just like all the others. It mustn't be Niyeh Kechol Ha'amim. And it's our responsibility to think about, in the public sense, how on earth should a Jewish state actually look? In which sense can it actually be Jewish? Ours, internal, not superficial, as in joining everyone else and doing the same. And of course, we want to have a robust economy, and we need to have a strong army. And in those senses, you know, we need to think about statecraft in the general sense, but in the inner workings, in the inner motion, what does it mean to have a Jewish army? What does it mean to have a Jewish economy? What does it mean to have to run a business? What does it mean to have a Jewish foreign office, and so on and so forth? These are questions that I think are key, and it's a part of what Rabbi Adlerstein mentioned of taking civic responsibility, but in the Jewish sense, in the sense of thinking about what can we bring to the table. So it's a personal question for each one of us. It's a communal question, but it's also a national challenge and a great opportunity. And I think it's something which needs a lot of reflecting.
In that reflection, what immediate steps come to mind? What is the manifestation of Jewishness of the mundane?
Well, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is actually thinking about it, meaning that there's a lot of things that I could get into, you know, what's the meaning of Shabbos in the public space, not just for, you know, not taking your fish from birds or birds from fish, but rather thinking about the meaning of Shabbos in the public space. How should that influence our economy or our labor laws? You know, what's the meaning of it? And there's a lot to be said about that, I think. And there's a lot to be said about many other things. But I think just, you know, we have so many Torah scholars, we have so many Batei Medrash, we have so many wonderful yeshivas, and to make the transition to actually, you know, apply all of that wealth of Torah to these tremendous questions of what does it mean in our day and age to have a Jewish state. I think that transition itself is something which is maybe beginning to happen, but it needs to gain a lot of traction, a lot of speed. And, you know, the first thing that first practical step, if you want, yeah, the Moetzes Gedolei HaTorah will look somewhat different to how it looks, and we'll deal with questions that are somewhat different to those that they deal with today.
Let me translate that in English. I think what he's really saying is that, like everyone in the audience, to send letters to the Tikva Fund, asking them to set up a Haredi think tank about the and to be headed by Dayan Pfeffer.
Very broad translation.
That is absolutely not what I meant. And but thank you for the attempt at translating. I'll
Okay, I think we'll move on to the next question. Interestingly, today is a merry day for the non-Jews. Yes. And it's interesting that it falls out today. If you think of any connection,
very rare occurrence.
It's a very rare occurrence. You think of any connection at all between said holiday and our commemoration, just the contrast is very stark.
I think this should begin with Rabbi Adlerstein,
supposed to begin with
Director of Interfaith Affairs. So.
As the member, yes.
The irony is appreciated. I'm not sure it goes beyond the irony, but that was 2,000 years. That's the last 2,000 years of our history. They celebrated, we mourned. And there was a direct linear correspondence between them. I don't think you have to go any further than that. whether the coincidence today is something that should cause us many deep, pensive moments. I'm not sure how many people here lost sleep Monday night about the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. Although if the Ibn Ezra were here today, he certainly would have, who actually wrote quite a piece about that, the conjunction back in his days. I think at the same time that there's a very, very direct connection between the two, and that I'm going to build on what Dayan Pfeffer said. He was somebody great in Europe who said that with all the diversity you find, different kinds of Yidden, when you scratch the surface, all the differences between Jewish groups, what you really find is the non-Jew. When you look at the punctiliousness of the punctuality, the commitment to detail of Yekes, what you're seeing is German culture for hundreds of years. When you look at the passion of Sfardim, you're looking at Mediterranean passion. I won't go into some of the others which are less complimentary, but there's a lot of truth in that. As who was it who said that if the non-Jews knew the effect of the church bells ringing, they would never stop them from ringing. They knew the effect on the Jewish heart. There's so much influence. It's not just in music, where we have people saying, we don't listen to anything Goyish, no Goyish music. So instead they listen to Goyish music that has Yiddish words put to them. When there is some genuinely Jewish music, Shlomo Carlebach was genuinely Jewish music. I think the old Rabbi Sons and maybe the original Dveikus was Jewish music. I think Yishai Ribo is Jewish music. Rav Kook had a very pointed view. He was not an isolationist, that's clear. But he did, in a number of pieces, talk about the need for the purity of a Jewish experience. To him, there's a beautiful piece in the Haggadah about chametz being this insidious stuff that you can't even see, that's pervasive, it's all around, and it can spoil the dough. Visual explanation, but as the influence of others. Yet, Rav Kook in other places was so open to taking from other cultures. And the answer is, I think, in a Kosov HaShlishi, that there has to be a basis of pure, untarnished bedrock Jewish culture. In the broader sense, it's a Torah culture. After that is firmly in place, then there is room for examining, for taking in. I think as Rav Tzadok said, the pasuk says, "V'ochalta es kol ha'amim." It doesn't say you will destroy all those nations, but you will assimilate the good stuff from them. V'ochalta, you'll consume the good points of all of those other cultures. People today, whether in Eretz Yisrael or whether in Golus, often grow up not primarily as Jews. They grow up as Jews plus. In the States, you grow up often as an American first, upon which later is added layers of Torah culture. That's a dangerous thing. And one more word, we like to make sure that there's a lot of Torah included. A remarkable word that I just published in my weekly shir online from Rav Yosef Nechemya Kornitzer, pretty much the last Rav of Krakow before the war. Remarkable, beautiful drush in the style of the Chassam Sofer, who was his great grandfather. Says that Rak am v'hihi chachmaschem uvinaschem le'enei ha'amin. The Torah is your chachma bina in the eyes of the nations, and they'll say, "What a wonderful rak am chacham v'navon hagoy hakadol hazeh." He says, "There's a sakana." we think it's great, they'll appreciate us. And today there are, this I know professionally, tens of millions, if not more, who look up to Jews for having Chachmas HaTorah. They don't want to convert. They're fine where they are, but they do see the wisdom of the Jewish people. Yosef Nechemia Konitzer says, that's a problem. On two counts. One is that they say, Kihi Chochmaschem. They attribute the Chochmah of Torah to smart Jews. It's gefilte fish all over again. Jews have IQs, one standard, but that's not what we pride ourselves on. That's a gift, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's. We have to make it apparent. Today, I can tell you there's some, and that should not be overlooked. And he says the other problem is that when you have non-Jews who appreciate you and realize that things have changed in the non-Jewish world, particularly in parts, not all, not at all, but there are tens of millions, that many, of Christians who look at Jews differently than they did for 2,000 years. Something happened. Binu Shno Storvador, the Rav of Tel Aviv 2 generations ago said, history, learning history, studying history is a mitzvah, but Binu Shno Storvador, know the shinui, the differences between generations. There are opportunities that we have today to teach non-Jews, particularly conservative Christians, about the beauty of Torah. There are dangers in it. We can speak about that some other time, but we should not lose the opportunity. When non-Jews look at us with admiration, the sakona is that we want to reciprocate. That when they look at us as, wow, you guys are great, you have so much chachma, as Tomei Philadelphus did, saying, I need this book for my library. So some Jews turned around and said, wow, he appreciates us, let's see what he has to say. And Rabbi Yosef Nechemia Konitzer says that was the beginning of the end. When we feel the need to reciprocate and say, wow, this Greek philosophy is pretty good, so assimilating that led some Jews to say, this stuff is better than what we have. And they became Misyavnim, Hellenizers. And that was a direct path to the Churban. So that's the overlap.
Dayan Pfeffer, would you like to respond?
I will, and I'll be brief because I know it's getting late and it's a Friday. I would say maybe as follows. The Rambam famously writes, the Rambam wasn't a fan of Christianity by any means. The Rambam writes very severe, and even today, even though Christianity has changed a lot, and I'm no expert, but nonetheless, several poskim still continue to quote the Rambam because he's the main source of Christianity's pitfalls and its shortcomings in terms of emunas hayichud and so on and so forth. And nonetheless, the Rambam writes in a letter that the way in which the path down which Mashiach will arrive is a path paved by the Christians, because they took our basic emunas hayichud and they spread it throughout the world. They were able to do what we couldn't. We needed that tool. We're ma'at mikol ha'amim, the Torah says. We're the few. And you know what? If we wouldn't be in Galus, if we wouldn't have the destruction, then maybe we wouldn't have needed this. I assume that to be true. Then we would have been able to develop our own route, our own path, our own means by which to disseminate, by which to show in a positive sense. When the positive says it's a good thing, right? With the computer, not the Drush. Yeah. It's a good thing, and I look around sometimes. I see the absence of I think, oh, Taka in Golas, we're not always such a shining beacon of light. But if we would have had our own roots, halavai, that would be wonderful. We didn't. And ultimately, the belief in the one God came through other roots, came through Christianity, came through Islam. And yet, the difference is still unbelievable, because just on a most basic level, and I whenever I'm asked about Christianity, I can't help but remembering Rav Moshe Shapiro, Rabbi, who used to speak with such a force and such a trepidation of people my age who still live with this tremendous feeling of dread concerning Christianity. He used to speak of it in when he spoke of the tumah, of the defilement. It was unbelievable for me to hear that having grown up in England and taken these things for granted, as it were, to hear him was a shock for me when he spoke about this. And one of the main points is, Christianity is a universalist religion. It's everyone can come on board. Everyone needs to have this just idea of faith and so on. Judaism, what we feel on Asara B'Tevet is a strong particularism. It's a strong feeling that we have a special connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that connection is ours. It doesn't mean that other nations can't have theirs, but we have our special connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have our special mission. We have our special message to bring to the world, and that's our responsibility. And this congruence, this coming together of Asara B'Tevet and the 25th of December, it just brings to mind the contrast. They can celebrate and be happy with their lot, and that's fine. The mood of celebration is a bit pagan, it's a bit unseemly, it's not what we would do. But they can celebrate in what they have. We want much more. Our celebration needs to be much more, and we're waiting for celebrations that will be entirely different. And our mourning brings to light everything that we miss. And when we fall into, adopting is imbued with what many like to call Judeo-Christian values, I leave Rabbi Adlerstein to reflect on that combination. But let me just say it's not what we want. It's partially. I'm not saying there's no good in Western values, and the good that there is there. I'm very happy to take responsibility for it and to say it all came from us, and we're pretty good at that, and that's fine. But there's so much that we need to bring to the table, and the coming together of these days just accentuates, emphasizes that point. And by the way, the 9th of Teves, one of the Shulchan Aruch says we don't know what happened on the 9th of Teves. Later down the line, some say it's Ezra Sefer, like we said today in the Piyutim. Some say that it's actually the day on which Yeshu Hanoitzi was born. And that's why they didn't want to reveal it, because they didn't want to say that we have a day of Tainus to commemorate his birthday. So there is some connection here. And even though, like the Rambam says, that it's brought a certain light into the world, but it's also brought tremendous darkness into the world. And those are things that we need to be very cognizant, very aware of, and not to fall, like was mentioned before, into the trap of adopting things that seem innocuous, seem harmless. There's so many things that seem to us to be harmless. You see the circus decorations which are pretty much, Christmas decorations, right? Big deal, right? Let's do the same. And what's wrong with this culture, with that culture, with Hollywood and so on. But ultimately, we're imbued, we absorb a lot of values that are not our own. And we have to think very strongly about developing, about realizing, about coming back to our own, core values. And we have the opportunity. We have a sovereign state. We have that opportunity. We need to make the most of it.
I have to respond to my dear friend and colleague, Dayan Pfeffer. I did not know that you are as much of a Golos Yid as you have now shown yourself to be.
From you, Rabbi Adlerstein, that's real.
I think that it's very important for us not to confuse process and goal, process and telos. Yes, Jewish exceptionalism, how different we are, what our goals are, how we do things is so important and something that should never come out of sharp focus. But we should not forget that according to many of our thinkers, going back to Psukim and Tanakh, and the last line of Volenu 3 times a day, there's a reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us those gifts, and they're not just for us. The end game of all of this is that those truths should be shared with the rest of the world. People are not supposed to become Jewish, but they are supposed to know what the reality is of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As the Meshech Chochmah says, V'atem tiyu segula mikol ha'amim ki li kol ha'aretz. Ask for Meir Simcha, if li kol ha'aretz, if everything is mine, the difference is people pay lip service to ideas of faith and unity, and they get it wrong. It's our job, maybe not today, but in the course of history. The specialness that we have is supposed to be shared with the rest of the world so that the entire world is redeemed. I think that's very important. Particularism and exceptionalism. We were the people at the same time that being particularist about Jewish interests and building up your own community doesn't lead to withdrawal, but Jews who were given the opportunity to amass wealth and in freedom were also the ones who and the last thing is, this is of the Rambam. Rambam was asked, are you allowed to? Gemara says that you can't, but with all of his contempt for Christianity, he says, it's a little different when it comes to Christians. Christians, you can teach Torah. That's what he says. Check me on it. 3 tshuvas. Why? Because they share with us a regard for Kisvei Kodesh. They believe in the divinity of Tanakh, our Tanakh. And that means that they're going to assimilate the message a little differently from others who will garble it entirely. And we have some of us, I'm not saying this is for everybody, but we should be open to the idea that in a world struggling for meaning, the next 4 years in the United States with all the other troubles, there's going to be a frontal attack not on Yiddishkeit, but on all religion. The dirtiest word in the American language now is the A word, absolute. There are no absolutes. Everything is up for grabs. You know what that does to people, to young people who are trying to raise families? And they're looking to us. So at least when we have the opportunity in the public forum, writing op-eds, participating in fora, being open to the guests, the tourists who will start coming to our streets again, start a conversation with them, say how happy you are that they're here, and give them words of encouragement to talk about what we have in common. That's vital for the security of the state of Israel.
So I just need one opportunity to respond. As a response, and that is that, first of all, I agree entirely. And I don't know how Rabbi Adlerstein managed to construe my previous words as a disagreement to what he just said, but I'll prove it with the following quote that I said this week. And that's concerning Yehuda and Yosef. And I think that this is important, not just to clarify, but also to explain why what I said before isn't a contradiction to what Rabbi Adlerstein said. Yehuda and Yosef are two centers, two leaderships within Klal Israel, right? Vayiga Sheil of Yehuda, this week's parasha, and Chazal say, Kihine Hamalachim No'adu. These are kings that are meeting together. And in the Haftarah, we find that Yechezkel has a prophecy of taking wood, pieces of wood, writing on one Yosef, writing on the other Yehuda, and bringing them together, bringing them together, unifying them. And that's how we reach the final redemption. What's special about Yehuda? What's special about Yosef? Yehuda has the Shem Havaya, the name, the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Within his name, Yud Kei Vav Kei is in Yehuda. Yehuda is our special relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The name, the Shem Havaya, that was revealed when we became a nation in Yetzias Mitzrayim. So this is Yehuda. Yosef, he's the king of Egypt. He's the king over everybody. Yosef represents a different idea. In Egypt, there's no Shem Havaya. Paro says, Lo yadati es Hashem. I don't know Hashem's name. He knows Elokim. He knows that name. He uses it several times. But that's a plural. That's something which is the representation of God in nature, the way that he is manifest in all of the ways of the world. And Yosef takes the Jewish idea, he takes that core, and he brings it to the world. He brings it to Mitzrayim. He brings it to everywhere. And we can only achieve our purpose with both of those centers. We need the Yehuda and we need the Yosef. We need to be internally strong. We need that particularism, and that's what I tried to emphasize before. We also need the Yosef. Without having our own chochmaschem ubinaschem, if we don't have our wisdom, if we don't have our understanding, then we won't be able to teach it to the nations. And therefore, we need to develop ourselves. We have to do that, because otherwise we won't have what to give. It'll be fluffy. It'll be wishy-washy. It won't be absolute, like Rabbi Adlerstein said. It'll be things that we've picked up and we sell them right on. We need to be strong internally ourselves. To have the Yehuda, we're called Yehudim after Yehuda. That's where we begin. However, of course, I absolutely agree. We need the Yosef also. We need to transmit it. The Torah is not exclusively for us. It's true, it was given to us. It's ours to teach, but it's for everyone to learn. And yes, there are different parts of Torah, and Torah Sheba'al Peh, and Torah Shebechsav. What can you teach non-Jews? What can't you teach? I won't get into it now because it's late. But absolutely, it's true. And I think that message needs to resonate. I think that the opportunities we have today are just remarkable in this very sense. And I'm going to leave it there because it's Friday and the moderators giving me dirty looks. So I'll stop there. But I appreciate the opportunity to speak about these very important issues.
I'm glad that we've reached a conclusion where we all agree. That's good. Are there any questions? We have some time for questions.
We spoke about just now the influence, once we've established ourselves, how to take that influence to the wider world. I find that now living in Israel 4 years, it's actually harder to do that. Because in England, I was surrounded by non-Jews. So it's true I've got lots of Jews to influence, but if it is that there is an element of also going beyond the Jewish community, and I don't run a blog or something that's read beyond Israel. How does one do that? If you're here, surely there's actually a lacking in being.
Well, I will direct it to Rabbi Adlerstein. as the interfaith.
It wasn't so long ago that the term global village was coined. That global village has changed a lot. And you've alluded to it, Ben. There are, in a sense, fewer opportunities for people here to interact with people in the office. That was always one of my bones to pick with many people in the United States, that non-Jews sometimes are very, very vocal. Religion and Jews would keep quiet and be silent. And they were unwilling to talk about issues of morality and current events from a Jewish perspective, when others were willing to hear it. So I used to prod people. You don't have that opportunity as much. You do have the opportunity because electronically we are all so linked today that there's so many. It's not for everybody, of course, but there are many people who are capable of doing that and interacting with all kinds of channels out there. The amount of hatred against Jews and against the state of Israel is just astounding. And Baruch Hashem, in every little town in America, you still have people who respond to stuff. The local papers in the United States have much more influence than the Big Five. Far, far, far more readership. But it takes more people to man the ramparts and to respond to issues. Lots of things going on that affect everybody. In Belgium, which is eventually going to mean Mila in the United States. There are lots of areas where we should get involved. But the other dies down the Ezra Sasher Chochmah developing the vaccine so much as HaKadosh Baruch Hu deciding that it's time for it to end. When that happens, there's going to be a wave of tourism coming back here. In the months before Corona, I think August of 2019 set a record for tourism in the state of Israel. Undone the next month. It'll be restored. The projection is that all the hotels that are going up, they're still going up. Once they're built, we'll still not be able to handle all of them. People come. I could tell you a few horror stories about this as well, about people who are disgorged from the buses and then treated in very not nice ways. The tourist trade to Israel is going to change rapidly. It's going to be the folks who did come before, particularly Christians from Europe, but they're also getting lots from Africa and from Asia. All we need, and this happened to a group of African Americans from my hometown of Los Angeles who came here. They were from a very, very pro-Israel church. And then a few of them, in the space of their first 2 days here in Israel, were told, Schwarzes, go home. We need this? Is this Jewish? So I would argue that not only get rid of the racism where it exists, most Israelis are not racist, that's very clear, less racist than Americans. But we should take the initiative. When you see these busloads, instead of kind of like smiling and, yeah, it's nice that these people are here, engage those people in conversation. You'll have far more of an opportunity here in Yerushalayim than any other city in Israel. So I think you can do a lot of good here. And this is not just Al Pi our Torah in bringing the final steps of Gula closer, but it's vital to the security of the state of Israel. I've been told that by multiple Gedolei Yisrael. They're the last group of reliable allies to the Jewish state. We got to keep them that way.
That you're able to teach. I mean, there's no problem, the Rambam says, to teach actually, Torah to non-Jews.
Well, that's the Rambam. We don't paskin by one particular rishon. That you have to sit down with the Dayan and get the guidelines. But they are more liberal than most people think. You put together things like the Sri Dayesh and very, very important earlier Sefer and all the things that are directly nogea to Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. There are lots and lots and lots of things that you can teach. And it's,
I would say the most important thing is to speak about the basic principles of Torah. Not Dafka the Yud Gimel Ikarim, but the Torah teaches us so much wisdom about life, not about how to keep Pesach necessarily. When I was answering on an international website, I got questions from Christians, how do I do a Leila Seder? Because I want to do a Leila Seder just like our ancestors, the Christians, did. I want to be a practicing Christian. I don't mean that. There's so much wealth and wisdom that we can give. And Ben, I've been visited by tens of Christians coming to Israel, looking for like a rabbi that they can visit and they can speak to and so on. They're looking for us. We don't even need to look for them. We do. I don't want to say anything, but if we are just open to it, then opportunities come up. That's my own experience.
Any other questions? Who would you like to direct it to? Both.
The moderator. He hasn't gotten any questions yet.
The cultural thing of like noting how based on the release the culture and how do you avoid that in a sense, like because other than maybe coming to Stitch and like living in like some totally hardcore neighborhood where you know outside culture, and I'm wondering like is it a bad thing or how is it something that has never been avoided?
Well, first, different question. Meaning, the fact of the matter is that we're all influenced and connecting ourselves from the reality in which we live, which is a reality that, by definition, is going to influence you in some way. But the first thing that I think is just so crucial is to be aware of it. To be aware, okay, this is coming from here, this is coming from here. This is not coming from, someplace deep in my Jewish soul. Okay, it's coming from here. And I think that we're seeing this on a certain level. Rabbi Adlerstein mentioned some of the, modern day Jewish artists, singers, composers, and so on, that are trying to come up with something which is specifically less culturally, if you want, assimilated to everything that's going on around us, and something which is more unique to us. Now, that uniqueness to us, someone will say, well, actually, it's just a blend of this. I can recognize something from here, and something from here, and something from here, and therefore, ultimately, it's not really Jewish. But the response to that would be, well, if it's something which is uniquely Jewish, then it's Jewish. Meaning, just like halacha. What's halacha? Halacha is what the Jewish people do. Does it exactly fit with, this opinion in Chazal or this necessarily psak that used to be? Not necessarily. It develops in an organic way, and it becomes halacha because that's what the Jewish people do. So again, the Jewish people who are faithful to Hashem and to His Torah, not everybody. Obviously, you can't wipe away halacha by saying that's what we do. But in the same sense, if the nigun of Kol Nidre, wherever it actually came from, but if that became how the Jewish people sing Kol Nidre, then that's a Jewish nigun, and that's the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us our track, our path throughout history. It's a path. Now we rely on a certain guidance from above, and we don't always know exactly where we draw from. We don't always know exactly how the next chapter of this history book is going to be written, but it's our responsibility to do our best. It's our responsibility to try to be aware that we're trying to create something which is internal, something that comes from within our hearts, privately, personally, and communally, and that becomes Jewish music, as it were, Jewish culture. Could you add to that?
Yeah.
Good.
I'll add just one grace note to that. Chazal say that they have a hard time figuring out Megillas Rus. Said there's no halacha, you don't learn anything from it, and it's there because to tell you something about chesed. So Rabbi Yoakito says, what do you mean there's no halacha there? There's halacha about chalipin, about yibum, about Yerusha. So he said all of those things could easily have been incorporated in a different sefer. The one thing that made Megillas Rus unique was that Klal Yisrael, ready to sort of launch the dynasty of Mashiach, needed an infusion of something it could not produce by itself. There was a chesed that was simply unavailable at the time to Yidden in Eretz Yisrael, and it had to come from the outside. Sometimes necessary things do come from other sources, much as we pretend that it's not true and we're fully self-sufficient. Sometimes there are very valuable things to be learned, and sometimes we become better or stronger by just viewing ourselves in contrast to some of those things, even the good things of others. And as Dayan said before, seeing how good things that they have, we do differently, and more particularly Jewishly. So I'm not as afraid. I'd say it's neither good nor bad, it's dangerous, and you have to be mindful of that all the time, and take counsel with people in what I do, which is about as dangerous as you can get. I go to Rav Asher Weiss Shlita once a year, and I said, your job is to rein me in. This is what I've been doing. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me where I should curtail what I'm doing. And he has a license to do that. So Baruch Hashem, I feel very privileged that I have that kind of relationship with him. But there are other people around, and you have to go and ask questions. I think the problem is that for some of us who feel as Westerners that there is a Jewish message for the rest of the world, and isolationism is not perfect for ourselves and for our kids, even for ourselves. We're stymied by the thought of a narrower Torah. We want to share it. We want to take in and to give out. So you have to go to a Rav who's sensitive to those. If that's where your Shorish Neshama comes from, find a Rav with a similar Shorish Neshama who'll understand those ideas.
All right. Thank you very much.